You are listening to Lighthearted, the official podcast of the United States Lighthouse Society. I'm Jeremy D'Entremont. Welcome. My co-host today is Michelle Jewel Shaw, rock star chairperson of Friends of Portsmouth Harbor Lighthouses. Hi, Michelle.
Hi, Jeremy, and hello to all of our listeners out there.
Today is July 16th, 2022, and this is episode 182 of Lighthearted. Shortly, we'll hear an interview I did with three people from the Friends of Plum Island Light in Massachusetts. It's a place and an organization I've known very well for many years. Have you been to Plum Island, Michelle?
I have, Jeremy. I went a few years ago on a very, very cold January morning to get pictures at sunrise of the lighthouse. It's a very pretty light. I really enjoyed the visit there.
It is. It's a beautiful old wooden lighthouse. There aren't a lot of 19th century wooden lighthouses still standing.
Right.
But also the other side of Plum Island, the southern portion of Plum Island is a national wildlife refuge, and that's a great place to visit too.
Yes.
So I recommend that to any of our listeners. Go see the lighthouse and the wildlife refuge. We'll be talking more about that, of course.
Yeah.
I grew up in Lynn, Massachusetts, near Boston, and my first memory of Plum Island, which Newburyport, Plum Island is just a fairly short distance north of where I grew up in Lynn. My first memory of Plum Island was when I was around like 6 or 7, I would say, somewhere around there. And an aunt and uncle rented a house there in summer. We went there for a visit, stayed there for a couple of days. I remember watching my uncle surf casting for striped bass from the shore. And he actually let me pull one of the fish ashore. I'm not sure I did it all by myself, but I felt like I did. And I just thought it was the coolest thing ever. And I still think of that whenever I visit Plum Island. So before we move on to our interview, I'd like to tell people about some lighthouse photography events that are coming up this summer.
Sure, Jeremy. Maine photographer Mike Leonard has a couple of events coming up. He'll be doing a photo cruise on the schooner Heron out of Rockport, Maine on August 27th. And he'll be doing a sunrise photography cruise out of Booth Bay Harbor, Maine on September 10th. You can get more info on his website at phototourismbymike.com.
Another photographer friend of this podcast, Pete Lerro, that's Lerro, will be doing a special photography cruise of Delaware Bay lighthouses out of Cape May, New Jersey on August 10th. He's also got several other lighthouse-related photo workshops in the works. See lerrophotography.com to find out more. So, Michelle, please help me tell everyone about Plum Island Light and our guests.
Sure, Jeremy. Plum Island, a 9-mile-long barrier island off the northern coast of Massachusetts, was first connected to the mainland by bridge in 1806. Newburyport was an important port by the late 1700s. The approach to the harbor was dangerous, with the sandbar and shifting channels at the mouth of the Merrimack River near the northern end of Plum Island.
To aid shipping entering the river, a pair of unlighted day beacons were erected in 1783, and for a time the Marine Society of Newburyport employed persons to hoist lanterns on the beacons at night. These methods proved inadequate, and in November 1787, the General Court of Massachusetts authorized the building of 2 small wooden lighthouses.
The lights would be an early example of range lights, meaning mariners would keep one light lined up behind the other as they proceeded in the creek channel. The 2 lighthouses, which began operation in 1788, had to be moved often as the channel shifted.
Aids to navigation came under federal jurisdiction in 1789, and the General Assembly of Massachusetts officially granted the light station to the U.S. in 1790. It isn't clear who maintained the lights in their earliest days, but President George Washington approved the appointment of Abner Lowell of Newburyport as keeper in March 1790.
The towers had to be rebuilt after a tornado in 1808, and one of the towers was later destroyed by fire in 1856. For some years, a makeshift lighthouse known as a bug light served in tandem with the surviving tower. In 1898, a new 45-foot conical shingled wooden lighthouse was built next to the old one. It was first lighted on September 20th, 1898.
In 1951, the light was automated, and in 1981, it was changed to flashing green. It remains an active aid to navigation. The lighthouse is now cared for by the Friends of Plum Island Light, a nonprofit organization formed in the 1990s. In 2003, ownership of the lighthouse was turned over to the city of Newburyport. The Friends of Plum Island Light continue to care for it under a lease agreement with the city.
Roslin Esposito is a longtime resident of Plum Island and volunteer for the Friends. And Jenn Bogard is the secretary of the Friends, and she serves on the board of directors of Newburyport's Custom House Maritime Museum. She's also an author.
Also taking part today's interview is Bill Cooper, who serves on the board of directors of Friends of Plum Island Light and has been the leader of Lighthouse projects for the last 5 years. Bill is a retired mechanical engineer with General Electric. I've been friendly with Roslyn and other people with the Friends of Plum Island Light for around 20 years or so, and it was a pleasure to do this interview recently. So let's listen to that conversation now. I am speaking this morning with Roslin Esposito, Jenn Bogard, and Bill Cooper, who are all volunteers, very active volunteers for Friends of Plum Island Light in Newburyport, Massachusetts. Plum Island has certainly been in my life for a long time. I've loved the place since I was a kid. I'm really happy to be talking about this subject today. Thank you all so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. So first of all, I'd like to talk a little bit about your personal connections. We'll talk about the lighthouse, of course, and a little bit about its history and what's going on there now. But I'd like to talk a little bit about all of you in relation to the lighthouse and the island. Roslyn, why don't we start with you? So what originally brought you to Plum Island, and how did you get involved with the lighthouse?
Well, family has been here since families were here, I think. My great uncle Tom Maddock was the life-saving station head down here for many years and worked closely with the lighthouse people, of course. And the Wood boys, how do I explain this? Two Wood sisters married two Maddock cousins.
Okay.
Or something like two Maddock sisters married two Wood cousins. That's how it goes.
Okay.
And they became a close-knit family, and the Wood boys and the Maddock boys all spent summers down here working at the station when a lot of the people got off because there weren't a lot of rough seas at the time. So they filled in for vacation times and stuff. So my dad worked down here at the life saving station for many, many years. Then when he grew out of that, he just always came to Plum Island. When I was born, this is where we came to Plum Island. And then coincidentally, I met my husband in 1957 in Haverhill. And it ended up, he had a cottage on Plum Island. So we ended up buying that cottage and been here ever since.
Yeah. And you were involved from the earliest days of the Friends of the Lighthouse, right?
That's correct. Yep.
And you continue to be very involved. Bill, same question for you. How did your association with Plum Island start, and how did you get to be involved with the Lighthouse?
Well, my family started coming down from Newburyport in about 56. We had a little skiff and we'd go out flounder fishing in the basin, and the cottage where I'm living right now on the basin front, 17 Harbor Street, burnt down. The predecessor building burned down in 58. My father bought the lot for $500 and he was a carpenter. So he built a basic cottage, and I inherited it, and been on the water since 56. Mm-hmm. And Steve Atherton got me involved with the lighthouse probably about 12, 13 years ago, I'd say. I didn't know much about it when I first got involved, and wherever I go, I end up doing projects. Okay, so there were several to be done, and we've had a lot of fun doing it.
Yeah, oh, I'm sure. And the group, all of you have done such a great job over the years. Jenn, you and I met recently. We'll talk about that in a little while, but I know I've learned something about the special connection you and your family have had to Plum Island and the Lighthouse. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. My grandfather was Arthur W. Woods, and his grandfather was Arthur W. Woods Sr., the lighthouse keeper of Plum Island from 1905 until he died in 1919. So my ancestor held Plum Island Lighthouse for 14 years. I like to say the lighthouse keeper is my grandfather's grandfather because it puts the passage of time into context for me and kind of makes it personally relevant. But as a side note, Keeper Woods, he also was the lighthouse keeper at Baker's Island, Salem, from 1887 to 1905. And then before that, he was stationed at Wood End. So really a lifetime of lighthouse keeping, I guess. And then last week, my mother actually just finished cleaning up the tombstone of Keeper Woods and his wife Emma at Newburyport's Oak Hill Cemetery. So it looks beautiful. And those letters USLHS or the United States Lighthouse Service, those can be seen on the tombstone. So that's pretty neat. And then my grandparents, Barbara and Arthur Woods, they were among the original founders and members of the Friends of Plum Island Light.
Right. But you personally, did you live on Plum Island or spend a lot of time on Plum Island when you were a kid?
I actually grew up in Newbury, and so I would ride my bike with my sister and all my childhood friends, and we'd ride our bike down from Newbury to my grandparents' house, kind of park our bikes and then swim in the basin and row skiffs, and my grandmother would make us lunch.
So, Roslyn, as you mentioned, you've been involved with the Friends of Plum Island Light since the beginning. Could you maybe say a little bit more about how the group was formed, who formed it? I know there was a mutual friend of ours, the late Barbara Keyser, who certainly had a lot to do with that, and Arthur Woods, Jenn's grandfather also.
Well, actually, the first aha moment was from Barbara Woods. She was reading one of her Lighthouse magazines, and they printed a doomsday list, and Plum Island Light was on it. So she immediately called Barbara Keyser, and they had been friends for quite a while. And Barbara got all excited, and she called me because of my Uncle Tom and my love of history, and the fact that my husband was a museum curator at one time, and he could guide us where to go next. So that's what happened. That was the original aha moment. And Barbara and I went to Coast Guard Station. They said, well, that's not the lighthouse that was on the doomsday list. That was Plum Island, New York.
Okay. I was going to say, I didn't think Plum Island, Mass was ever on the... Yeah.
But however, it's not a bad idea. A lot of lighthouses are getting turned over to private organizations, and they are expensive for us to run, and it might be a dream come true for everybody. So contact back and forth, and finally we went into Boston Coast Guard, and the ball got rolling at that point, and that was in 1993. And then when we found out we could really do it, we approached Tim Harrison, American Lighthouse Foundation at the time. Now it's New England Light.
No, it's the other way around. It was New England Lighthouse Foundation. Now it's the American Lighthouse Foundation. Yeah.
Okay. So we contacted him, and he said, sure, you can come under our wing if you do get the cooperation. And he told us what to do, which we did. And then Barbara called Steve Atherton. He came in next, and a few others, Steve Lyons, Bob Smith, and got enough people to contribute enough money to start the thing going, and hired a lawyer, wrote the papers, applied for permit, and Tim took care of a lot of the stuff for us. So then the ball got rolling, and we got the lighthouse. We originally got it with a 5-year lease from the Coast Guard, with the thought that if we were successful, they would turn it over to us. But in the meantime, they found out it was easier to turn it over to a city, and then the city turned it over to us.
Yeah.
Which is what happened. And then the city didn't turn it over to us.
Right. So it's a lease agreement with the
lease
city.
Situation.
Yeah. So just to be clear, as you said, it began as a chapter of the American Lighthouse Foundation, but your group is a separate organization today, right?
We thought it would be a lot more difficult to get 501c3, and it wasn't difficult at all. I applied for it, and we had it within months.
Yeah. Just want to be clear on that. So if we could talk a little bit about the history of the light station itself, and any of you are welcome, or all of you are welcome to answer these next couple of questions. But first of all, the mouth of the Merrimack River is known for being very treacherous. You're all very aware of that. The sands have shifted there over the years, and I understand the location of the lighthouse, I think, is not exactly where the original lights were built back in, like, was it 1788? Am I correct about that?
Nowhere near.
Mm-hmm.
It's been all over the place.
Yeah.
So,
You'd have to see a map. Bill put a really great map in the kiosk, showed the original shape of Plum Island. Where the lighthouse is now, actually where my house is now, wasn't here. There was no basin. It was just a little peak of land that came out of what we call Old Point Road now. So
Yep.
all this land came over from Salisbury in the 1830 something, formed a big spit of land. So the lighthouse was useless
Yeah.
where it was.
Right. And I'm sure
It
the
moved.
mouth of the
so
river.
there were two lights too, there were basically range lights, and they
Yeah.
were on the side of the south side of the river as it ran out, probably about 4/10 of a mile south of where the South Jetty is now. And that was about 1830, 35. And Salisbury Point would be overlapping where the Plum Island Point is today. And then in 1841, a storm blew through Salisbury Point, and they had two river mouths.
Okay.
So then it migrated to the mouth being where it is today.
Yeah.
And in 1880, when they started the jetty, that finalized it. It was definitely there. So.
Mm-hmm. So has it been fairly stable there in recent years as far as the mouth of the river? That really hasn't shifted.
Since 1898, it's not too bad.
Yeah.
Yeah. As soon as they started the jetties, they've got established the mouth, and there's been erosion problems on the ocean front, and now there's erosion in the river. Where the South Jetty connects to land.
Yeah.
Where the lighthouse has been stable.
Yeah, yeah. And you mentioned the kiosk, Roslyn, that Bill, like, you've had a lot to do with that. That's a recent development there. So I just want to mention that again. And if people are visiting the lighthouse there, they'll want to take a look at the kiosk that has some material on the history of the place. Right. So
It's got just about everything.
yeah,
But
and I know you have a lot inside the base of the lighthouse too, if people are able to be there for a tour.
that's correct.
Yeah.
But it gives you a good feel for the property and what it's gone through. Probably Jenn put the timeline together, so she'd be better at that. One side of it is the timeline of everything that's happened from the beginning, actually before the lighthouses were built, when they were just day beacons, and how the merchants got together and got the money together to do all this stuff. And right up to the present time.
Yeah.
And it's all put together in a timeline.
That's great. That's
with old pictures.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think what bothered all of us was that, visitors would come to the lighthouse when it was closed, and there was very little information to be seen on the lighthouse. So they'd say that this is neat, but they didn't know the history or anything. And so the kiosk tells them basically everything: history, where it's been, the river migration, what the friends are, how to contact us, how to buy a brick, who the lighthouse keepers were. I mean, the whole ball of wax is right there in the kiosk, including QR codes.
So they can even read more through on their phones if they want to take advantage of that.
Through your website, Jenn's website that she made for us.
Yeah. Since you mentioned that, I will mention right now that Jenn created a new website for the Friends, which is what's the address for that?
So it's www.friendsofplumislandlight.org. And so far, we just have a basic website that we set up for tours to learn about the Friends and, like Bill was saying, our most recent projects and how to support the light. And then right now, members of the Friends we're kind of working on creating written stories. I know Steve Atherton, he's working on writing up some stories to go with some photos that we can post on the site and really just continue to kind of tell the story of the history of the light. I think we're also going to add the pieces that we have on the kiosk, because we have them in digital form. So I think we'll go ahead and add those kind of educational pieces to the website too. So right now it's just kind of a basic shell, and then we'll keep adding as we go. It's kind of a living, breathing document.
Yeah, well, that's the nice thing about a website as opposed to, say, a book. It's a little harder to change a book that's out there, but a website is always in progress. So it's beautiful. It's a beautiful website, and it'll get even better as time goes on, I'm sure. So just a little bit back to the history for a couple minutes. There, the original range lights, which now there's the single light, but originally range lights were established there in, am I remembering the date right? 1788. Yeah.
Yep.
And sometimes I always I always shy away from making absolute statements like this, that was the first range lights in the United States. You see that sometimes, but I'm not positive it was.
We believe that.
Okay, probably, most likely the original range lights in the United States. And for listeners who might not know, of course, you have with range lights, you have a front range light and a rear range light, and the mariners, as they're coming into a channel, line the two lights up to know that they're in the correct channel. And then Newburyport later in the 1870s got another pair of range lights, more in the downtown area, and they're still there on Water Street. They're not active anymore, but it's a little unusual for there to be two sets of fairly major range lights like that coming into a harbor. So obviously Newburyport was a really important place. What was so important about Newburyport? What was going on that led to the establishment of those lighthouses?
I thought is since the merchants put it all together to begin with and came up with the money, that it had to have something to do with the merchants in town. Shipping was important, getting goods important, getting goods up to Lowell, Haverhill, Lawrence. That was important. This was easy access to Lowell and Lawrence and so forth.
Newburyport was a huge, shipbuilding port.
Yeah, we built the ships here.
So there was a lot of traffic of new boats being built and repairs being made. And, Newburyport way back then, was as big a port as Boston. So there was just a lot of commerce coming through here. Yeah.
And a little bit later in the mid 1800s became a center for clipper shipbuilding, which was really important too. So Jenn, back to you. Again, you and I met very recently at the library in Newburyport to go through some materials together. You have donated photos and other materials that originally belonged to your ancestor, Keeper Arthur Woods, your grandfather's grandfather. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Over the past couple of years, really, my mom and I worked with Sharon Speldener and Val Spalding over at the Newburyport Public Library Archival Center. And we created the Barbara and Arthur W. Woods collection. So basically the items in the collection show daily life around the lighthouse, around the keeper's house, around Maplewood Cottage. And Maplewood Cottage is a house on 78th Street, very close to the lighthouse, that Keeper Woods actually purchased in 1910 while he was living in the lighthouse keeper's house as the keeper. And so it's interesting because my family owned the house, Maplewood Cottage, for over 100 years. And I think that's important to mention because this meant that all the lighthouse related artifacts stayed in the home throughout the generations. So throughout really a century worth of time around the lighthouse. So we were able to really create a collection of a variety of primary and secondary sources. The collection includes a diary of the lighthouse keeper's family, which was from 1911, and then the ink pen that I'm assuming went with it. And then I have the diary right here. So is it okay if I read two short little excerpts I think are kind of neat?
Absolutely. Yeah, please do.
Okay, so on the last page of the diary, it says, it's signed Miss E. Grace Woods, who she was the keeper's daughter, Plum Island Lighthouse, Newburyport, Mass. And then she wrote the quote, "Some people are like fountain pens. They do write occasionally." So I thought that was neat. And then this is another neat entry on February 10th. It reads, Cloudy. I'm feeling much better. Par, he was the lighthouse keeper. They called him Par. And Art went over to the lights. Pole on the red light is almost on the beach. Par and Art moved the house today. So I'm assuming that's Lighthouse. I forgot to say that little kitten Teeny died this week. Snowed hard in the afternoon, but did not amount to much. So Par going over to the lights is mentioned again and again throughout this diary.
Mm-hmm.
And then the collection also includes poems about Plum Island, which I love as someone who teaches poetry, newspaper clippings that date back all the way to the 1800s. There's receipts in the collection for payment for lighthouse keeping, and also just records of the salary for keeping the lights, all the deeds. So the deed to Maplewood Cottage, the deeds that were passed down through the generations. Something really interesting that I feel like is in the collection too is the obituaries of the keeper's siblings. So my family kept all of the obituaries of the whole lighthouse keeping family. Some of the obituaries show the tragic deaths. So his brothers both died as young men. One brother was a sleepwalker and he walked overboard a yacht in the night. While the
Wow.
keeper was with him, there was a group of young men on the boat. And so the keeper had to report back the next morning that his brother had passed, likely due to sleepwalking and walking overboard. The lighthouse keeper's other sibling died at 23 of heart issues. But my favorite
Mm-hmm.
part of the whole collection are these postcards that were sent to and from the lighthouse keeper and his wife to their grown children, because again, they just show the daily life. And in the postcards, they talk about their time living on the island and keeping the light.
Yeah.
So lots of things to see in the collection. The Newburyport Archival Center is an amazing place. So I strongly suggest a visit.
Yeah. Oh, me too. And it's an amazing collection, and it's just a wonderful thing that you've donated that to the library and that it's available to the public. There aren't that many collections like that related to a particular keeper with so much material, photos and other material. And I should mention also that not all of it is Plum Island. There's some stuff, at least photos of Baker's Island as well, where you mentioned he was keeper for quite a while. And I also mentioned before we move on that you and the library have consented to some of those materials being integrated into the U.S. Lighthouse Society archives as well, and we'll eventually make some of the pictures available online that way. So
Yes.
that's, yeah. So thank you for that. So just before we move on, are there any other like stories, anecdotes, or anything to do with the family's history at Plum Island, Jenn, at the Lighthouse?
Well, I was thinking to all the listeners, I just wanted to say that, to ask the questions, to interview your relatives. My grandfather would talk here and there about bits and pieces of the Lighthouse family history. Mostly he talked about his Aunt Grace, who was the keeper's daughter. He really loved spending time with his Aunt Grace and her husband, Bill. But it was known that she took care of the light when the keeper was ill.
Mm-hmm.
So they talked about that quite a bit. But growing up, I was, caught up in my own daily life. And I do want to go back and ask questions in the moments when he mentioned things here and there. But toward the end of my grandfather's life, he passed in 2017. But he began talking about the photo albums that he wanted me to take care of. And there was this one day when I visited and he sat me down on the couch and showed me albums full of photos and the newspaper articles and more, and asked me to take them home. So I did something that I'm really grateful for doing. And I took everything to Staples. I had PDFs made, and then I came back to my grandparents' house days later with my laptop, and I used a recording software program, which was Jing. And I recorded him talking about each one of the photos just so that I would remember and I would know who was in the photos. I feel like this was the best thing that I could have done, not only for just the information that I learned, but mostly for the way that I could see he was thrilled with how I was invested and curious and asking questions. And so, but he was born in 1931, and his grandfather, the keeper, passed in 1905. So he didn't know him in person, but he knew of all the stories of the keeper and his family through all of the artifacts left behind. So there were 3 stories that he talked about over time. I don't know if we have time for me to give a little blurb about them or not, but
Sure. We have all the
um,
time we need. That's a
okay,
nice,
you can always
nice
cut
thing about a
it out.
podcast. Yeah.
You can always cut it out. But I was thinking it's almost like you can recreate the story of the keeper's family's life just through the diary, the postcards, the photos, and more. But the first story that he used to talk about was one in 1908. There's a newspaper article about it where everyone's just panicking because of a sea monster at the mouth of the basin. And so Keeper Woods runs out and he has this dictionary that he's holding in his hand and showing everyone that was actually a mola or a sunfish.
Right. I've seen those. They do look kind of like sea monsters in a way.
Yeah. And then the second one he talked about a lot was that it's a 1910 article that's actually in the first floor of the lighthouse now. And it's called Can He Attend to Two Lights? Grave responsibility rests on Keeper Woods. So it's about the government reducing costs for keepers by having him make daily trips across the mouth of the river to care for black rocks, in addition to his own station of Plum Island Light. And then the third one that he talked about was the story of the keeper's son, so his father, and in a newspaper article from the Newburyport Daily News, which was in January of 1910. The headline was "A Sturdy Lad from Plum Island. Arthur Woods walks from the Point to Jackman School." And then there's a little excerpt from that article that I think is interesting. It says, Arthur Woods Jr., the 13-year-old son of Arthur Woods, lighthouse keeper at Plum Island, is so desirous of an education that distance has no terrors for him. Monday, he walked from Plum Island Point to the Jackman School in this city where he is a student. And in spite of the bitter cold and high wind, he was on hand again yesterday. So
That's great.
so those are 3 stories. So I feel like most of the stories are from the primary sources that were saved in the house over the years.
Yeah, it's all fantastic. This stuff's like treasure. It's absolute gold. And again, you and your grandfather before you are to be commended for saving that and again making it available. It's just a great thing. Let's talk a little bit more about the Friends and the Friends of Plum Island Light and all the things that have been accomplished over the years. I've watched it since early on. Any of you can take this, but what are some of the major restoration projects the Friends have carried out over the years?
The first restoration the Coast Guard did for us.
Right.
They gave us the lighthouse with a full new set of shingles and a sturdier staircase and a new lightning rod and $30,000 worth of work they did.
Mm-hmm.
And then the group has paid all the money since. Probably the biggest job that we've done is the windows, and Bill led that group on the windows. So he's probably better off to talk on it, but it was quite a feat because the windows were not only curved, they bubbled. So they had to be fabricated.
Yeah. This is the lantern glass you're talking about?
Right.
Yeah, like right behind you, all those panels that are diamond shaped and triangle shaped, Jeremy, they're all bent glass.
Yeah.
And
bent glass and bubbled out.
Yeah. So they actually build a mold, the exact size of those things, a steel mold, and then heat the glass pane up to fall into that mold.
Yeah. Wow.
And it's going to be within a 16th of an inch, to fit within the frame.
Yeah.
Which is steel all the way around. Try and find a source of qualified glass and a qualified installer, which is very, very difficult to do.
Yeah.
And it turns out this Ron Barrett, another director, has a friend that was called Jay Green that worked for New England Glass and Finishing in Salem, New Hampshire. And he took on the project and had a real focus to get it done for us. And he retired on our job and we're still working for a couple of days afterwards.
Wow.
So we started thinking we had 4 panes of glass broken, and we ended up with 6. And they got it all done one day, and we came back to do some glazing on the outside, and the panel in the door, which was the biggest panel replaced, was cracked. Fortunately for us, when they took the glass out, they found that it was a little bit oversized. So the manufacturer agreed to replace it, and New England Glass and Finishing agreed to replace it. So it wasn't on us. And they reglazed the whole outside of the light and did a fantastic job. The money for that whole project, which was about $17,000, was donated by one
That's
family.
great. Mm-hmm.
That was the most difficult job I think we took on, and the most expensive. And I think that was done, I think it was in 2019 was the year. Does that sound right with us?
Yeah, probably.
It looks fantastic. And you mentioned the picture behind me. People, of course, people listening can't see that right now. This is we're on Zoom, and I put up a picture as my background of inside the lantern room of Plum Island Lighthouse.
Yep.
But that style lantern with the diamond shaped panes, I think is very beautiful, but it's also obviously more difficult when you have to do a project like that and replace the glass. It's a lot harder than them.
And very costly.
Jeremy, do you see many curved glass lighthouses?
There are a number of other lighthouses that have similar lanterns to yours. One of the ones in New England is Graves Light in Boston Harbor.
Right.
I think Rockland Breakwater Light in Maine, I think, has the diamond panes.
I talked to the owner of Graves Light, and he said, "Well, you don't want to buy it where I bought it." They were very, very good at what they do, but very
expensive,
dated, and I think very expensive and dated in the technology they were using to build the glass. So
yeah. Well, Dave, Dave's done an amazing job there with Graves Light, and you learn obviously as you go along. We all do. It's hard to know everything there is to know about lighthouse renovation until you experience it. So is there anything more in the works at this point? Anything in the pipeline, restoration, renovation projects?
Well, we've done a lot. We've replaced the floor. We built a shed. We put in a memorial brick walkway. And you're familiar with the inside of it, but it used to be completely plastered with lathes. And before we got it, the lathes were all taken off, the plaster taken down because it was all mildew.
Right.
But we put in probably an 8 to 10 foot high section of the way it used to look, just to give you an idea. So, and it's made the downstairs a lot nicer.
Mm-hmm.
We put lighting in the stairway.
Yep.
We put a new floor in. I think I said that. Flagpole, benches, a new catwalk.
We put a new cable railing system around the catwalk.
That's right. Yes.
The cables used to go through the pipes, and that was causing corrosion problems within the pipes. So we built stainless clamps that clamped the stanchion, and then allowed the cables to sit outside of the stanchion. And that's worked pretty well. We're trying to get a contractor to paint the the railing system and the black from the catwalk to the top. He showed up one day last week, but I've been trying to get a schedule for him. Working with contractors is not always easy.
Yeah, we've all experienced that with lighthouses and our homes. You mentioned Roslyn, you mentioned the shed, which is fairly new, and the shed is in the style of like a life-saving service boathouse, right?
It's a replica of the boathouse that was there, which is still there on 45th Street.
Right. It was moved from its original location. It's actually a private home now, right?
It's a private home. It's where it was located when it got to this part of the island. It was actually the boathouse from the southern end. The station. Okay. There were 2 stations down here.
Okay.
One was down the southern end, and that was a boat small enough to move, in other words. And they moved it and had an auxiliary boathouse.
Oh, okay. I wasn't clear on its history.
There's a picture in the lighthouse, Jeremy, of these people, lifesavers, going out in a boat through the surf to try and make a rescue. And you would never try it. Anybody.
Yeah.
any sanity or concern for their life wouldn't try and do that.
Yeah. Well, they were a special breed, those
Yeah.
surfmen in the life-saving service, and they had that motto: you have to go out, but you don't have to come back. In other words, they had to do their duty, but they never knew if they were going to make it back or not.
That's accurate, I think.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the lens. You're lucky enough to still have an active fourth order Fresnel lens. I think most of our listeners are from, our lighthouse buffs are familiar with Fresnel, Fresnel lenses, which are mostly made in France in the 19th century. And probably, it's hard to say a percentage exactly, but in the neighborhood of 10-ish% of our lighthouses still have their classical Fresnel lenses. So it's nice that you still have that, which makes it kind of special. Anybody want to comment on that?
Well, it is beautiful. Working on this kiosk, we did come across something we didn't know, whether there's any validation to it or not anywhere, I don't know. But apparently that was not the first Fresnel lens at the lighthouse. There was a fifth order. That toppled down.
Okay.
And they said that this lighthouse was important enough to warrant a fourth order lens, which is larger. And so that came considerably later than the date of the lens. The lens is 1856 or 7. And it was several years after that.
Yeah. So this was the previous lighthouse that you're talking about would have been a fifth order lens, but then it changed to a fourth order. And that
Right.
I know there are pictures of the new lighthouse, the present lighthouse, 1898, being completed right next to the previous one.
Right.
And then I guess
carried the lens across on that plan.
They carried the lens across from one to the other, which was pretty cool. It is, in some cases, it's really difficult to trace the history of these lenses. Portsmouth Harbor Lighthouse that I'm very involved with, we have a fourth order lens, but it's by a certain maker, and an inspection report from 1935 records a lens by a different maker, and we don't know why it would have been changed after 1935. So we still trying to figure that out. So a lot of lighthouses have kind of mysteries connected to the history of the lenses. Yeah. But I like to call them functional works of art, and they're just so beautiful to look at. I'm sure you get a lot of comments from visitors there. So for quite a few years now, you've had a kind of a path outside the lighthouse with memorial bricks. Would one of you like to tell me about that, what that's all about?
Well, it was a way to support the lighthouse. We sell the bricks, have them engraved to whatever you want them to say, within reason. And it's a good way to celebrate a wedding, celebrate a birth, celebrate a death, just to remember. We've sold, I wish Steve were here, I think we've sold way over 500 bricks. We're pretty well filled the walkway.
Yeah. Are there still bricks for sale? People still do that?
Yes. Yep. The $75, Russ?
They're $75 now, yes.
Right. And I think they're
you're limited with what you can put. You can have 1 to 3 lines and no more than 14 letters to a line, including punctuation and spaces. So you are limited.
Yeah. And I know there's names of some of the keepers of the past, including Arthur Woods, probably your grandfather has a brick, and your grandfather's grandfather. Is that right, Jen?
I believe there are bricks.
We bought one.
Yeah.
The lighthouse bought one for some of the keepers that we knew of. George Keyser, Arthur Woods.
Yeah. I should have mentioned before, we were talking about Barbara Keyser, was one of the founders of the organization. Her ancestor, her grandfather, right? George Keyser, who was a keeper there, and there's a few other places like Thatcher Island, Boston Light, I believe, as an assistant. There's a picture of him and his wife at Plum Island with a pigeon. I think he raised like carrier pigeons at Plum Island. Is that right?
So I guess a lot of you know more than we do about this, but apparently a lot of the lighthouse keepers had pigeons, probably a way to get word to somebody in the old days.
Yeah, I believe they did that at Boone Island Light in southern Maine, which is really isolated. It was like 8 miles out in the ocean. So for a while, that's how they sent messages to shore. Yeah, that's a neat picture, the picture of keeper.
We do have a picture of the lighthouse. It looked like there were chicken coops in the background.
That would make sense.
But it was at the same time as George Keyser had the homing pigeons. So
yeah, well, there's certainly
think it was to store his pigeons.
Yeah. Well, there probably were chickens there at times too, I would imagine.
Probably.
Most family light stations on the mainland had chickens. Some of them had cows. Ever see pictures
Yeah,
of
but don't they just roam around loose, don't they?
which the chickens or the cows?
But yeah, obviously you wouldn't put the
Yeah.
cow in a cubby, but yeah, I think the chickens just roamed around
In
loose.
some cases, yeah. There's a picture, Ipswich, which isn't far from you. There was range lights at Ipswich, what's now Cranes Beach, and there's a great picture of the keeper feeding his chickens on the beach, with the chickens just running around in the sand on the
Yeah.
beach. So, yeah.
I also wanted to just mention that information about purchasing a commemorative brick is on the website, just in case people wanted to go there and learn how to do that and all.
Well, thank you for mentioning that. That's good to know. So people can find that at the website very easily. So let's talk for a minute about the keeper's house that's right next to the lighthouse, where the keepers and families lived for many years. And could you remind me when or about when was the light automated and the keeper was removed?
1945, I think it was the last.
1945,
keeper.
yeah, was the last keeper.
Yeah.
1945. Okay.
Yeah.
And the house is being used how now?
The Parker River Wildlife rents it out to their interns in the summertime.
Okay.
Wintertime, I don't think I've ever seen anyone there.
Yeah. I know it used to be occupied by the manager of the wildlife refuge and his family, right? But now the interns use it.
It's interesting. I have a clipping that was part of the collection. It's an article from the Lighthouse Digest, and it was September of '94, and it was titled "Group Formed to Save Newburyport Light," which is an article from the time when the light was, still under the federal government, and the Friends was in the process of being formed. But I thought it was fascinating because in the article it mentioned that the Friends also wanted to eventually oversee the keeper's house in addition to the light. But I was thinking that was a long time ago now. So, almost 30 years. But Roz, I was wondering if that was one of the initial goals.
That was one of the initial goals. But the Wildlife Service was not like the Coast Guard. They wouldn't turn it over to us. They wanted a like exchange of property, and the property was valued at a pretty high amount.
Yeah.
They wouldn't sell it for money. You had to exchange it with another piece of property. So there's no way we could do that.
It's interesting because the land directly around the lighthouse belongs to the city, right? And then the rest of the grounds, so including the lighthouse keeper's home, are overseen by the Parker River National Wildlife Refuge. So
when the Coast Guard turned it over to the Parker River, they cut out 110 by 120 piece of land that the lighthouse, the tower was on. And that's what is donated, given to the city now.
Yeah, well, I hope maybe something will change, maybe for the good with the house. Not that it's not being used well now, but I'd love to see you guys, your organization,
but it's
get
older
it.
than it looks. It actually, because it's got siding on it, it looks like a newer house. But I think it was 1870 something that it was built.
Right. Yeah, built during when the previous lighthouse was in use.
And the manager of Matt Hillman is his name, the manager of the Parker River National Wildlife. Now, he was wonderful when I reached out and asked if I could see inside the keeper's home. If we could all go in. He made a time right away. So I think it's exciting to be able to kind of collaborate with them and see inside and get to learn about it. Maybe eventually we could have a plaque on the outside of it just to kind of show that it's a historical building, or who knows.
So, Jenn, you mentioned before that you teach poetry, but you're the author of several books, including a couple of children's books that relate to Plum Island that I think are really cool. Can you just maybe say a little bit about that?
Yes, I teach for Lesley University, and I help teachers use poetry in their kindergarten through 12th grade classrooms. And then I also write books for teachers about integrating the arts and language arts and in social studies. Those are published by Shell Education. So my first book about Plum Island kind of combines my love of poetry and history, my love of the island and teaching. So it's an alphabet book of short poems for all ages. Many of the poems are called found poems, in that I took words and phrases right from sources. So right from some newspaper articles, videos, signs, just in an effort to stay as close to the historical information as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I was able to include the actual article in the book so that readers could find the words from my poems in the text. But as an elementary school teacher, I taught elementary school for almost 18 years. And I experienced really how those historical primary sources, the old newspapers, photos, documents, they really do spark wonder. And just how they allow us to relate to people and to times of the past. And then my other book about Plum Island is a baby board book, and that's called B is for Beach Plums, the ABCs of Plum Island, and that's for the littlest.
Mm-hmm.
And that's illustrated by Alex Edgerly. And then I have scavenger hunts related to the books on my website, and just excited when people go out and do the scavenger hunts and kind of experience familiar places around Plum Island with fresh eyes. And then some readers send me their original poems about the island, and I love to get them. That's one of my favorite things, is just when kids email me their poems about Plum Island. So
yeah, I can see how that would be special. So your books are beautifully done. How can people get your books? Or you have a personal website, don't you, that tells about the books?
I do. It's Jenn with 2 N's, Jenn Bogard. So BOGARD.com. And then I have photos of all of the local shops that carry the books. And they're also available on Amazon through River Run Bookshop.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. So I have one final question for all of you. Okay, you can fight amongst yourselves as to who's going to answer first. And this is for bonus points. All right, and it's actually a 2-part question. The questions are: what do you love most about your association with Plum Island itself? And secondly, what do you enjoy most about your involvement with the Lighthouse? So who wants to go first?
Don't all jump at it.
Roslyn, you want to go first?
Well, who doesn't love Plum Island? It's hard not to love it, except in the winter.
Yeah.
And then a lot of people like it then too, but it's a friendly place. It's a good, clean place to live. Has its problems, but I like it here. I don't, as I said, I don't care for the winters. I spent 38 years in the Keys in the winter time, so
Yeah.
this is tough for me to get used to full time, but
Mm-hmm.
I love it from spring till fall. And
Yeah.
happy as a clam.
Yeah.
And what was the other part of the question?
What do you love most about your association with the Lighthouse?
I keep learning. I think I know everything, and then something new comes along, and I make a new discovery. And I thought I knew all about the history of the lighthouse, and then I find one thing more. And I was just telling Jenn earlier that I was reading some field notes from a surveyor from, well, what date is it? 1826. And he talks about in 1820, the 2 towers and the keeper's house will move 600 feet. Learning something like that, who ever knew they moved the houses too?
Wow. Yeah.
I had no idea, actually. And it's little bits and pieces, you learn new things every day.
Yeah.
And we learned a lot working on this kiosk.
Yeah, I'm sure.
I was amazed at how much information we came up with.
Yeah. Well, I've been doing Lighthouse stuff for almost 40 years, and I learn new stuff every day from people like you and others. So it's always.
But you deal with a lot of lighthouses. This is just one. You think you get to a point where you know everything, but boy, you don't. You don't know anything at all.
That's absolutely true. Jenn, you want to take the 2-part question?
Sure. So what I love most about my association with Plum Island, to me, Plum Island is time with family and friends. My mom and I like to walk the boardwalks of the refuge and spend time on the beach. We always look for sand dollars. That's kind of our thing. My sister and I meet for lunch, and my friends and I enjoy the beach. But also the memories. I think the memories of falling asleep at my grandparents' house, where that, the backdrop of that flashing green light on the wall, and just hearing the flagpole in the wind. But all the boat trips, learning how to swim and float, and of course the lighthouse. And then what I enjoy most about my involvement in the lighthouse is definitely the people. So each person here in this podcast, and the other friends of Plum Island Light, the visitors that come to experience it. I love connecting with other people who care about the lighthouse. And this is kind of a side note, but when I was younger, I stayed at my grandparents' house a lot. And one night I woke up in the middle of the night and I saw this like huge apparition, like a big man or woman or some kind of like person. It's and I remember telling my grandparents, and they said, "No, you didn't see anything. There was nothing there." But I kind of feel like it might have been the keeper, because when I saw his picture on a postcard years later, it was that kind of shape. So I don't know. I just feel like I was always meant to be connected to the lighthouse in some way.
It makes a lot of sense to me, and I don't discount what you experienced.
I can still picture what I saw today.
Uh-huh. Well, I think it, it may have been a spirit, or it may have been sort of a vision that you had that relates to your passion for preserving that history. So, yeah. But I think it's a real experience in any case. And I always, when that kind of subject comes up, I always say that whether you believe it literally or figuratively, the spirits of the keepers of the past are very much with us every day. So Bill, you want to take the question?
Okay. What we love best about Plum Island is really, the water, being on the water, the proximity, the sunsets. We also, the neighborhood of Plum Island, if I walked around the community I'm in uptown, I mean, nobody would speak to me, down here. I mean, typically, everybody within 2 blocks of you, and, what the issues are and things going on with them and other stuff. And it's really a community much different than it is uptown Newburyport. As far as the lighthouse involvement, I mean, I really enjoy working with other people to get things done. I think it's paid back when you see visitors come to the lighthouse, and, they are just so enthralled with the lighthouse, and that we've preserved it. And, it just gives you a really good feeling, rewarding feeling for what we're doing.
Yeah.
It's not a day that doesn't go by when you walk over there and somebody's at the kiosk now or something else, and you stop by and talk to them for a few minutes. And there's a story there. They're from England or New York or whatever, And
Yeah.
That's
great.
Nice to keep doing what we're doing, what you're doing.
Yeah. Well, you're doing a great job, all of you here, and the whole group, Friends of Plum Island Light, for many years now, has done a wonderful job at that place. And it is a special island, a special lighthouse, very beautiful, one of the few wooden lighthouses left from the 1800s. And I recommend that people check it out. And there are tours available by appointment at this point, which I believe can be secured through the website. Is that right, Jen?
Yes, right on the website, we can go ahead, and there's dates on the website that people can sign up for 15-minute slots. So for the 2022 season, just coming off of being closed for COVID, we decided, we really wanted to keep all of our visitors safe and our volunteers safe.
Yeah.
So we have 4 days that people can go ahead and sign up for 15-minute slots.
All right. Yeah, I recommend people check that out. But even if they can't make one of the tour days, it's worth going to the grounds and seeing the beautiful place and seeing Plum Island in general. And the wildlife refuge also, the whole southern part of the island is a beautiful wildlife refuge, and people should check that out as well.
Yes, and people can always email for a tour as well. So if they can't make the tour days, they can email and request a day for a tour.
Yeah, that's a good point. And all that contact info is on the website as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, thank you all, Roslin Esposito, Jenn Bogard, and Bill Cooper. I really appreciate you spending this time with me today. And I got to get back there because I haven't been there since you put the information kiosk there. So I'm overdue for a visit.
Yeah.
And Roslyn, I'll just personally thank you for all the times you've helped with tours when I've brought tour groups there over the years. I really appreciate that.
Yeah,
Thanks
we've
for the
done a few.
hospitality. Yeah. So thank you all so much. And I'll be seeing you on Plum Island. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
You can learn more about Plum Island Lighthouse at friendsofplumislandlight.org. You can also make an appointment for a tour through the site.
I have many fond memories of Plum Island, as I said before, going back to when I was a kid. In addition to the lighthouse, as I also mentioned earlier, my wife and I have often visited the Parker River National Wildlife Refuge on the island. It's a great place for bird watching or just to take a nice walk on the beach.
I've been to the Parker River Wildlife Refuge. It's really a great day trip to do. Thanks to today's guests, Jenn Bogard, Roslin Esposito, and Bill Cooper. Thanks also to all the volunteers, members, and staff of the U.S. Lighthouse Society. Check out uslhs.org to learn about all the things that the Society offers. And remember that donations and memberships help to support this podcast.
Please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or any podcast platform that allows you to post reviews. And please share word of this podcast on social media.
The American artist John Shedd once wrote, quote, "A ship in the harbor is safe, but that's not what ships are built for," end quote.
The next episode of Lighthearted will feature a conversation with two people connected to 40 Mile Point Light Station in Michigan. As always, to our regular listeners and to our new ones, thanks so much for listening and
keep a good light.